Yeah,
Oh,
it's a cute microphone.
amazing. Hi, Jesse. Welcome to Winter with Grace. We're live, by the way.
Hi, Grace. I see it. We're 7 seconds in now. I'm excited.
Oh
Thank
my
you for
God.
having me on here.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Let's talk about, so I feel like for the audience who don't know you, what are they even doing? But anyway, so like, why don't we start with the WeWork TLDR? So you meet the WeWork founder from Craigslist and
Yeah,
fast forward to like you help them build the community and you were like the head of IT. So WeWork Lab. Why don't we start there? And then,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, no, happy to. So yeah, you covered it. I did meet Adam Miguel through a Craigslist ad, which is a story I've shared on a couple stages. But to get to there just real quick, I've been in New York now 15 years, and so when I moved to New York, the New York tech community was really it was early. There were hundreds, if not maybe even 1,000 entrepreneurs and venture
Mhm,
capitalists, but like in a massive city with millions of people, like that's a pretty small community.
mhm,
And so I was going to the New York Tech Meetup where, 1,000 people get the Skirball Center. That was the whole New York tech community.
mhm,
And I started a company here. And my best friend and I, we were looking for an office space. And so we weren't looking to start a community necessarily in New York. We were kind of naturally community instigators, if you will, maybe not even
mhm,
builders. We just like to invite people out for drinks and dinner and food and Korean barbecue a lot. Um, and so we wound up looking for an office space, and Adam and Miguel were advertising on Craigslist, like cool boutique office in Grand and Lafayette. And so we went down there one day for a tour, and Adam Miguel's vision was so vast compared to what they had that at that time. The website was WeWorkNYC.com. It
mhm,
was just New York. But Adam talked about creating a community of millions of entrepreneurs around the world, all
mhm,
working together in physical spaces. Um, it was an interesting idea, but frankly, he wasn't super tech savvy. And he's like, yeah, he's like, that LinkedIn thing that everybody's a part of, that website, like we'll do that, but we'll do it in real life. Like that was like his pitch. And
mhm,
so I happened to be an engineer. I was in the technology orbit. I was starting a tech company. And so we handshook on doing a deal together where we would take a half of the second floor they were opening, the fifth floor of the Grand and Lafayette building, and we would open what we called WeWork Labs. And it was just an idea for early stage technology entrepreneurs to come together and work in an open office space. We would have like demo days, and we bring in partners from Microsoft and Google that were our friends to help teach them about engineering and marketing and all this stuff. And it blossomed from there. That was in 2010 that we got together. 2011, actually on April 1st, just a couple days ago, would have been the anniversary. It was an April Fool's Day launch
mhm,
where we opened that first floor, and we grew that from the 47 founders in WeWork Labs to being probably at the height of while I was running it, we were close to 5 or 6,000 founders across the country.
mhm.
And while I joined WeWork in the end of 2011 full time, we grew that from we were 4 people when we first got involved to almost 4,000 employees. So it was a journey. I left in 2016 when my son was born. And as you noted, by the way, the only role I ever held there, because I was like founding employee, just do some of everything. The only role I ever held that I was actually equipped to hold and like well informed about was I did lead our IT group for a short period of time, which is what my background was in. But probably the more impactful stuff was around corporate development and M&A and investing. And so that's what got me into this venture.
I wonder, fast forward to later on, you work at, you like started the chat with Flybridge team. Originally, they were helping you starting your fund, and then you end up joining them a couple months in. What were like the learnings like to turn community into, I guess, like an investment thesis? Like, how do you kind of like build
Yeah.
that practice for yourself?
No, it's a great question. I so it's funny you say this. So venture capital is sort of only people. There's like anybody who says otherwise, it's just about the people. It's about the partner that invests in you. It's about the people that invest in us as a fund. And it's about the people that we invest in. And so it's maybe one of the most naturally lean community leading parts of the financial industry, right? Like it is about knowing people. It's about helping them. It's about getting new people in your orbit and connecting them together. Like that's how
Mhm,
success happens in this industry. And so I've been a really active angel investor in New York, backing lots of different founders. And probably the single most important thing I did for them is I would connect them to each other, right? I'd back the next brilliant set of founders who were half the time stealing desk space at WeWork and not paying full rent, which was fine with me. And I connect them to the last people that did that before they raised capital. I'd say, hey, you could learn some lessons here. You can accelerate this. So when I left WeWork, I thought to myself, I'm going to build my own venture fund. Like I'm going to take my community from WeWork. It's at that point, tens of thousands of entrepreneurs, and I'm going to bring them together, and I'm going to continue backing them just as I had as an angel. And that's what a fund is. My friend David Aronoff, who was sort of a mentor of mine, who was one of the partners leading Flybridge, he and I got breakfast, and he's like, that all sounds awesome. He's like, but running a fund is more than just writing checks. There are LPs, there's portfolio management, there's some crisis management when your portfolio isn't going well. And there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. And if you want to do this forever, like this is what you want your career to be, you got to learn more than just how to write checks. Like that part I was good at. Connecting founders I was good at. And so, that quickly evolved into me getting to know David and Jeff and Chip, who are my partners now. And, they started educating me on what it took. They started their original venture fund together in the early 2000s. Flybridge as a fund started in 2008. I was joining them in 2016. So they had like a decade and a half of time to learn how to run a great fund. And it was a great fund. And so from that standpoint, I had this super lucky moment in time where they said, you could either go at your own or you can join us and we could be partners and you could lead New York. And New York was near and dear to my heart. It's where we built WeWork. It's where most of my investments were. And so it was great.
I got a couple questions there. Like one is I feel like recently I've been looking into, I feel like I've learned a lot I want to give a shout out to like the Cool Water event this like past 2 days. They were like amazing. There was like a whole bunch of emerging manager came and like people were talking about building funds. So I feel like there's a couple questions I've been thinking about. Like I wonder, what's your thought on them? Like one is like, you have such a big community coming out of WeWork, and how do you quickly filter out on the effective deal flow for yourself? Because I feel like knowing someone, like vibing with them, like thinking they're like amazing guy, girl, or whatever, is like one thing. The other thing is like you have to construct like a portfolio and then kind of like manage to come up with a thesis. Like, how do you kind of come up with a thesis in like a specific domain? Since like nowadays, like LPs are looking for people with a super specific niche thing that's like, overlooked by the, traditional VC funds or something. So
Yeah.
I wonder, how do you kind of like turn the community into deal flow, effective, high quality deal flow to also come out with a thesis around what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And you hit the nail on the head, by the way. This is stuff that I learned over the last 8 years with my partners. Like LPs care about a thesis. I just assumed they cared about if I invested in good things. That apparently they wanted more than that. So I'll answer that in reverse order. I'll talk about the thesis first. So for me, I had spent 6 years building WeWork and being a part of what became sort of a movement globally, right? We launched WeWork in 25 different countries and cities all across the US. And in every single city, every country, we felt the same energy. People wanted to work and operate differently. Now, COVID accelerated that in a crazy way. Right now, there's all these distributed teams, everybody work from home. But at the time, we were bucking the trend, right? Every time we would go and talk to somebody, you talk to one entrepreneur who was like, yes, this is how I want to work. And you talk to 4 other people that were in the traditional industry, finance or manufacturing or whatever. And they'd say, we're not going to work in a co-working space. We're not going to have open space. We want windows that are covered up. We don't want people to steal our ideas. By the way, it's never the idea that is the winner. It's always the team, but we'll come back to that. And so I was fortunate in developing a thesis was really driven by everything I lived and saw every day from 2010 to 2016 and beyond that. And so my thesis has centered around what I talk about as the future of work. Now, left on its own, it's kind of a meaningless thesis. Like it's like the future of work could be anything. And I often get this question from LPs, like, isn't everything the future of work? And I'm like, yeah, if you squint, sure. But for me, what I really honed in on is that in this world where people work in open spaces, distributed teams across time zones, across languages, across cultures, all of those require a refresh in the technology that connects them. We can't always do things live like we're doing now. If your team you're on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast, it's nice we found this overlapping time, but there's many hours of the day where if I messaged you, you would probably tell me to stop messaging you because you're trying to sleep, and that's even worse if you're split between the US and China or the US and India. And so communication, collaboration, culture development, and creativity, creative tooling, these are all areas that are ripe for disruption. And so I think when I think about how to develop a thesis, what I think about is what is an earned secret that I have? What is something that I have been involved in or invested in personally for longer than other people? And one thing that I would note is you don't always have to be the outlier. Like you don't always have to buck the trend. Sometimes it's just you see it clearer, you can articulate it better, you have experience that helps to drive it forward. So there were a lot of funds when I was starting in venture and even when I was an active angel that were investing around the future of work. It's just for many years after leaving WeWork, I could sit down and say, listen, you think your product's good for the future of how Gen Z, or the millennials are going to work like in the next decade. They're going to work in open spaces and share their knowledge. They're not going to care that they work for one company. They're going to moonlight for another company. I've been seeing that and working in that environment for a decade, longer than you have, right? And so like I've got some ideas there that can help to accelerate your plan. So at the end of the day, a thesis is just, to me, it's this like earned secret and it's earned opportunity for you to invest in an area that you know something about that others don't. Now, do LPs agree and do they want to invest in that thesis? That's a whole different thing. Just like going to raise capital as a founder, we pitch a lot of LPs. Our anchor LPs have been with us, fortunately, for more than a decade. So they've invested as our theses have changed. But many new people will look at that and they'll say, oh, no, I really only like, deep tech. I only like space tech. I only like things in crypto or fintech. That's fine. We're not the right fit for everyone. The second part of your question, which I can answer in a more succinct way, is how do you sort of leverage community into deal flow? It's this right here. It is bringing people together, whether it's one-on-one like we're doing here or one-to-many, or it's small groups coming together. I have listened for the last 15 years that I've been in New York to what every entrepreneur has said is maybe their toughest challenge at the pre-seed or seed stage. And it changes over time, but it's hiring, it's working with AI applications, it's fundraising, it's firing your co-founder, it's you name the topic. I've listened, I've paid attention, and I just try to bring people together around that. And so last Wednesday, we had an event launching in New York. 125 people came, 400 people on the wait list. Like, it was an event just centered around how to build an early stage company while living and growing up in New York. Like, there are certain challenges to being here rather than being in the Bay Area like you are. There's you don't have Google and Facebook in your backyard here. You have a big Google office, but it's not the same. And so how do you acquire talent in New York? Different than how do you do it in the Bay Area? How do you live in New York? I just had a call before I got on this chat with you with one of my founders who's decided he wants to move to New York. And he wanted to know, where should I live? Like, this is a company that's doing millions of dollars a year in revenue. And the founder was like, I want to know, where should I live? And I love having that conversation. And the next thing I'm going to do when we're done here is connect him to 3 other founders that are just like him in my portfolio, my network, and say, hey, you 4 should talk. You should talk about how you decided where you live, how you decided how you live in New York as a young founder here building your company. And so you do that, and everybody wants to share deals. Everybody wants to tell you about their best friend who's starting something new and amazing. The vast majority of my deal flow comes from either my current portfolio companies or those who I've helped along their journeys over the years. So many of my ex-WeWork colleagues, I've backed them, and many of those people have then sent me people that are starting their next thing. I just got an introduction from one of my portfolio founders to a CEO of a company that makes an amazing baby technology product that I used with my daughter today. And I'm so excited to hear what this guy's working on next. And this came because it's a founder that I've helped in the same way that I'm going to help this other founder move to New York over the years. So community is truly about staying in touch, collaborating, and supporting each other. And it's kind of like, I don't know, to me, I'll tell you, the best investors, the best board members I've ever seen with companies are the ones that honestly mostly get out of the way. They make connections, they share 1 or 2 thoughts, and then they get out of the way.
I have so many questions. I want to start with like I wrote down a couple questions. One is like you mentioned about this is like related to the investing side. One is like how do you mentioned about an anchor LP. I guess like besides like, maybe the founding member of the fund knows them for like a million years. Like what's their I guess like how do you see like I guess how do you communicate your deal flow to LP in a language that LP would be able to understand? And since like people are evaluating based on eventually the amount of money that's generated, like how do you
Yeah.
kind of see I guess like how do you package it in a way that's like, making sense on the financial level?
Yeah.
Right.
It's by the way, that is an extraordinarily thoughtful question when it comes to like you're thinking 5 steps ahead of what I was thinking when I was going into venture. So shows what I knew. The this question about how do we communicate our unique deal flow to LPs? How do they evaluate that? Because we're investing at the pre-seed and seed stage, two people and an idea or prototype. We tell our LPs like we're not going to see liquidity for 10, 12, 15 years. Like, so what you're investing in today is the fact that we're going to back some people over the next 3 years who in 15 years are going to make you money. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. At the end of the day, what matters is cash on cash. Like if you are an LP, you hear terms like IRR, you hear TVPI, you hear all this. They care about DPI. How many dollars did I get back for every dollar I put in? That's it. But when you're doing that 15 years earlier, you obviously can't promise that, right? You can show past performance, but that's not necessarily what you're going to do. So I can tell you how we do it. We have a little bit of a unique model in how we deal source. So we deal source from our own network. We deal source from our portfolio company founders, as I was describing. And then we have this platform that we call Next Wave. And Next Wave is a series of pre-seed funds that we're the investor in. They're our own proprietary funds. The newest one that we launched is Next Wave New York. And each fund has a thesis of its own and a community of investors who invest those dollars. So they're kind of like scout vehicles.
Mhm.
The major difference between that and like a Sequoia Scout program or a Lightspeed one is that you invest as a team as opposed to just one-off check writing. So you bring deals in just like we do as a fund. And the reason I describe this is because that happens to be an asset that we own, and we have now spent 7 years honing our skill in. That asset, each one of those 6 funds writes 18 checks a year. So 6 funds, 18 checks a year. A fund investment cycle tends to be 3 years. So we wind up with hundreds of companies over 3 years that our partners who are operators and founders themselves have invested in. They're close to the founders. So when we go to our LPs, one of the things that we're explaining to them is we have this unique asset. We have 50 people out there sourcing deals in communities that we and I am not necessarily a part of. So one of those funds is called X Factor Ventures. They've just crossed over their 100th deal. All female founders backing new female founders. That's the whole fund's thesis. They have their areas they like to invest in. Frankly, there are a lot of pre-seed female founded companies who aren't going to call me because they don't know me, right? And they feel like, and this is true, unfortunately, that I'm not going to understand them in the same way that another female founder is going to understand them. So X Factor gets to go in, get in early, back these founders, and then help us and educate us in the categories they're building in.
Mm.
So now you ask the question, by the way, how do you explain that to LPs? Well, carefully, calmly, we build a nice looking pitch deck. We design that slide, that tries to explain it. And we ultimately go and show it to our LPs. The ones that have been with us a long time have seen the results. They've reaped the rewards of that. And they're a great person to then lean on and say, does this make sense? Does this tell the story that I just told you? And so it is just like raising capital as a founder. You're pitching your story. You're pitching a promise of the future.
I wonder, there are so many like community driven funds in like every space. I guess like how do you kind of differentiate yourself from,
Yeah.
an AI community fund or like,
Yeah. How did you know what our deck says?
Mhm.
No, look, it's a great question. It really is. It goes back to what I said earlier. It's about the people. So you as an LP are backing the people. So I have 3 other partners, Jeff, Chip, and Anna. We each have our own qualities. We each have our stories. We each have our backgrounds. And you are pitching us as being uniquely situated to take advantage of the communities that we're in. So, I'll give you an example. There are a lot of founders that went to Harvard Business School.
Mhm.
There's no question about that. Very successful founders.
Mhm.
There are a lot of investors that went to Harvard Business School. Totally. I did not, just to be clear. My partner, Jeff, went to Harvard undergrad, went to Harvard Business School, was a multi-time entrepreneur. And now he's my partner at Flybridge, but he's also taught the class launching tech ventures at Harvard Business School for the last more than a decade now.
Mhm.
So when we talk about the graduate syndicate, which is another one of those next wave vehicles, those scout vehicles I was talking about, it's not just that we have a thesis that we like to back founders that are coming out of Harvard because they're uniquely situated, they have great networks and good ideas and ... yada, 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 if you will. It's also that Jeff literally teaches the course. So there are thousands of students who come to Professor Bus Gang, which I would never call him, but who come to Professor Bus Gang. And if I meet somebody who went to HBS in the last decade and they at all are interested in entrepreneurship, I'm like, oh, do you know Professor Bus Gang? And they're like, of course. Either I took his class or I tried to take his class and I didn't get picked in the lottery. And so I wish I took his class. And so that is a unique asset that we hold, that Jeff holds, that our team holds. And so you come through each of us and you say, what is that unique asset? How do we package it up? At the end of the day, LPs see lots of funds and you hit the nail on the head, which is how are they going to differentiate it? Frankly, sometimes it comes down to timing and luck. Are you the first one they heard with this pitch? Are you the last one they heard with this pitch? Are you the most believable one they heard with this pitch? It's not always clear, but that's no different from venture raising.
Mm. When you mentioned about the next wave scout program, right? So how do you guys like select the people within that program? And like you mentioned, like there's a bunch of fund measure, like six. Is it six fund manager or like?
So we have 6 funds, 6 vehicles, and each of them have about a dozen partners.
Oh, okay. So that's like I don't know, 100 people or
It's a
something.
lot of
Like
people.
what are we looking at? Like, and then
It's
how does the each
let's
fund
call it
work?
70-ish.
Okay, so each fund has, like, about,
Yeah.
like, 12 people-ish, and then, like, how do the 12 people function? Are they like a dorm room fund or something? Like or, like so are
Yeah.
they, like, a younger people come together sitting at a table like, "Okay, let's evaluate if this deal makes sense," or they're, like,
No,
mini VC
so
funds
it's
or how?
that's a yeah, no, it's great. So each of the funds operates a little differently, right? There is
Yeah.
something about venture which again goes back to it's about the people. So how does that team effectively operate? In the graduate syndicates case for Jeff's fund, which is focused on Harvard, Jeff actually sits in the decision-making spot and he's got a dozen Harvard professors who are basically sourcing deals and saying, this is why a person that was in my class seems super interesting. You should meet them. You should talk to them. Here's a category I think is cool.
Okay.
In the Next Wave New York City fund, which is the newest one, it's funny you asked with the dorm room one. So I'm going to like rapidly list out the companies that the partners have been a part of in senior roles or as founders. And that is Bowery Farming is $1 billion autonomous farming company. Casper Mattress, which was at one point $1 billion public company. Chief, Flatiron School, Foursquare, Major League Hacking, OpenAI exec, Snowflake exec, the Squire founders, WeWork, obviously, and the Wing. So these are not, young. They could be young. That's not about age, but they're not necessarily it's not their first rodeo. In this case, they have a lot to offer to every founder they may get to back. And so the way that team operates is everyone shares deals asynchronously. We all happen to be in New York, but still we share them asynchronously. And in any one deal, 2 partners can lead it. So you just need to find one out of the 12 or 11 other people that want to do that deal with you. There's a thoughtful memo process and a little bit of diligence and questions, but ultimately they make the decisions, not me, even though I sort of can hang out, ask questions, help mentor them as investors. And so it's a little bit different for every fund because of the audience, because of the partnership and their dynamics. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting is sometimes you meet a founder and you just think to yourself, this might be the smartest, most driven person I've ever met. How do I convince someone else to agree with me? That's really what we're asking you to do. Convince one other thoughtful, smart person on your team to agree with you. And that feels like the right bar at the pre-seed. It really is about the people. It's not about the product. It's not really about the market or the idea. Often they don't have a product. And so that's how we've learned to operate them. We do something a little bit similar at Flybridge, to be clear. So at a later stage, we write $1 to $3 million checks. Our next wave funds write $50,000, $100,000 checks. But even at a $3 million check is very similar. I meet a founder, I get to know them, I spend time with them, a few hours, maybe longer. And then I try to convince one of my partners. I want to try to convince them to see what I see. What is this special spark? What is this earned secret the founder has, just like the way I need one? And if I can do that, if I can convince one of my other 3 founders, I think we're on the right track and we likely get to yes in that case. If I can't convince another partner on our team, I might be missing something. Doesn't mean I don't do the deal in the end, to be clear, but I might be missing something.
I wonder as for like the, I guess like the track record or performance, like how do you kind of evaluate yourself after a while? Like, or like, I guess like, do you shoot for every deal that's going to return the whole fund? Like, I feel like most Silicon Valley fund, like, I feel like this is like how I've learned, like, so people would try to return the whole fund by every single deal that they bring on.
Yeah.
I feel like the earlier it gets, like, the harder it is to kind of see, because there's like so many smart people. How do you even like kind of vet if it's something like would make sense? And after the next wave group select, let's say you're like 70 something company or whatever, like, or like over 100 company, and how do you kind of like leverage that into investing in the, I guess, like the next round?
Yeah. So on the first question, I mean, the simple math for most venture funds at the early stages, 6 out of 10 of our bets, we'll back about 30 or 40 companies in a fund. 6 out of 10 are going to go to zero. Like we're backing them so early. So you might have an amazing idea. You may be a great team. You may be at the wrong time of the market. So if I imagine that 6 out of 10 go to zero, I need the rest to make up those 6. So the next 2 or 3 out of 10 make up for the first 6 that went to zero. And the last one is the one that we think about, can it return the fund? And so, the math as a venture fund tends to be that for us. We think about that both in the next wave funds as well as in Flybridge. Now, you mentioned maybe it's harder at the earlier stage. The fact is that our funds are sized to manage this issue, right? So the next wave fund's writing $50,000 checks. It's only a $3 million fund, right? So at the end of the day, returning $3 million is a lot easier than returning $30 million, which is a lot easier than returning $300 million. And so we do size it that way. Now, the truth of the matter is, like, when I got into this, I was an active angel. I invested in 20, don't quote, well, I guess we're live and it's being recorded, so maybe you are quoting me on this, but about 25 companies over 24 months, give or take, a couple of 2 checks into the same company. My angel performance, if viewed as a fund, is exceptional. Like, just like by the numbers, it was a vintage that would have been like 2014 to 2017, and it sits at 13x, and I've already returned almost 2.5 times the money. Like, this is an amazing fund if it was a fund. Now, here's the problem. I don't have to return money to investors because it was my money, right? I don't have to return the fund first. So it's disingenuous, right? It's not a fund, but it is indicative of like performance, right? It means that I can get into great deals. I pick great people. That's my hope going forward. Now, let's have this conversation in 5 to 10 years from now. I'll tell you how I've been as a venture investor then. It's still early, but when you think about it, this idea of, I want every investment to be better than the last investment. I want to have learned something from the last founder, from the last company, from the last industry, that I believe will make this investment even more likely to succeed. And if I do that, the compounding value that investing for a long time will do is, in theory, my return should get better over time, not worse. Now, that would be lovely if it worked that way always. It obviously doesn't. Some of it's luck, a lot of it's luck. But I do try to instill that in our next wave partners as well. Like, the reason we invest as a fund as opposed to individuals is that you should look across the portfolio and say, oh, I understand why when we backed that company last year, we took a bet that the founder would figure out how to, use computer vision in that farming application, but it turns out it's really costly. Okay, so the next time I'm investing in something, maybe I should think a little bit more about the cost of compute for computer vision, right? That'll make me make a slightly better investment decision the next time around. So really, we do think about is there compounding learnings from every investment you make. And yeah, at the end of the day, the simple math is, can this return the fund? We're usually not right, to be clear.
Mhm. I wonder, okay, so I think a lot of funds, like not funds, but like I guess like a lot of like individual angel investors or like just like single check writers are, or let's talk about like let's say syndicate or something. Right now syndicate's very
Yeah,
popular, like everyone is like they can just pick a deal and then find like a bunch of people to co-invest, right? It's kind of like a
yeah,
group check writing. um Many people are paying attention to like who else are investing, like if there's like a famous like logo on as
yeah.
like an investor investing in XYZ company. um I guess what are the benchmark you use to select the deals, and like how would, yeah, like how do you pick deals in general?
Yeah. Yeah, so what I would say is two things. We certainly care about the quality of other people around the table, meaning are they value add and was the founder smart in picking the people that they picked to help them along the way? We rarely care about the incoming investors, like the ones that are coming this round. We're not really asking that question. We tend to lead deals. So we're not looking for signal, did Andreessen commit already? But we do look at the people that you had come in before, the angels that you chose, or the pre-seed investors who are coming in at the seed. And so I think it's a judgment call for everyone. But ultimately, if you were able to convince smart people to believe in you, then that's a good signal, right? It doesn't mean you're going to be successful. Um, at the end of the day, we look at, I'm going to count these up as we're talking because I have it up on my screen. We look at 10 different vectors when we are deciding on a deal. Ultimately, that is the market opportunity. We rate each of these on a 1 to 5. It's not actually how we make the decision, but we do it sort of to have a conversation. So we talk about, is the market opportunity great? How great is the team? What's the product like if it exists? The business model, the competitive landscape, how the deal looks. Is it an expensive deal? As in, is it overpriced or not? What's it going to be worth in the future? As in, is this a strategic company to someone as an acquisition or a public company? How disruptive is it to the industry that it's in? How different is it? Does it have network effects? And finally, how much of a thematic fit is it to us? So those are the 10 vectors we look at. We don't rate them equally. Team is number one. Team is the heaviest weighting for us. We look for people who have grit, who want to persevere, who have proven they persevere. And we look to see if they have this, what we call a Pied Piper effect, like from the fable, not the startup show, but the
Mhm,
fable, the Pied Piper. And are you able to convince people to irrationally follow you is really the
mhm,
point that we make. And that could be other investors, that could be employees, that could be business partners, it could be customers.
mhm,
But ultimately, do you have something special about yourself as a founder where people want to irrationally follow you long before they should? So we have a company that we just backed recently that we just announced. It's an AI security company, and their first customer is a Fortune 10 company that is paying them $1 million+ a year. And they did that before they raised their seed.
mhm,
We had a reference call with their customer, and their customer is like, this is maybe one of the most important decisions we made in the last year. This is a senior executive of a Fortune 10 company. Like, that is an incredible signal for founders who hadn't raised their round yet, who didn't have a ton of capital, who didn't have a ton of traction, right? They got this company that should have said, we can't buy from you. We need you to have $1 billion in revenue before I'd feel safe buying from you. So team is number one. Market trend is number two when it comes to weighting that market opportunity. And then third, and a fast fall and a far later one, is like product and business model. They matter. You should be thoughtful. But frankly, we don't believe the product you start with is the one you're going to end with.
mm. So I want to switch gear a little bit on like community building. So one of the most effective way to build a community based on what we just chatted about is like maybe you're creating events or connecting people to each other. How do you build this at scale? And how like what kind of funnel would you create based on like, having met like, the 5,000 people who are in the
Yeah.
WeWork community to quickly, because I don't think you, or I don't know if you can, but I personally cannot interact with 5,000 people, be their best friend, and like,
No,
all that.
no,
But yeah.
no. So look, the first thing I'll say is community for the most part doesn't scale. And this is maybe the single biggest mistake that I see people make. Drive a lot of value to fewer people is a far better model for building community than is driving a little bit of value to more. So quality over quantity always. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one is there's this concept of Dunbar's number. There's like how many people can you truly know well, and that number is roughly 150 people, like relationships that you can keep in your head. To your point, you can't know what 5,000 people are doing at any moment. I don't care what kind of technology you have. Like high level, you can know what they're doing. You can scan their LinkedIn, but you can't actually know them, right? You can't know what motivates them, how they're feeling today or last week, and so ultimately, a more focused effort is a better path forward. So the way I handled it when it came to being an angel with WeWork is I would argue that my community was actually our community managers of each of the WeWork Lab spaces, of which when
Mm,
I left, there were only about 50 community managers or 50 people that oversaw. Now, each of those spaces had 200 plus entrepreneurs in them.
mhm,
So if you think about sort of your point here, that's 10,000 people, 10,000 entrepreneurs. But what I would do is I would think about what did my community managers need the most? How could I empower them to help to do their job better? One of the
mhm,
things they were measured on was NPS. How much did their community appreciate them, right? Were they helping them? And for
mhm,
many of their members, there were people that needed capital, right? They needed
mhm,
to fundraise. They needed smart angels. So I would go to all 50 community managers, which I can do. I know all of them personally. I know how they're feeling. I know how their
mhm,
girlfriends or boyfriends are doing. And I can say to them, hey, I know you just hosted this event last Friday. Like, tell me about who was the smartest person that you talked to? Who was the most driven person you talked to? Who was the craziest person you talked to? Frankly, is sometimes the question I wanted to ask. Like,
mhm,
who seemed like off the rocker? Sometimes they're the best entrepreneurs. And so it's all about defining who your community is. So if I were going to start a new fund today, like I just started Next Wave New York, my position is my community of Next Wave is actually the 12 partners, not all of the other founders that will wind up backing. They're an extension of my community. And so I can know what all 12 partners are interested in. I can know what excites them. I can know what motivates them as investors, and I can lean on that. So as we were talking about, we have 70 partners across those 6 Next Wave vehicles today. 70 is not insurmountable. I can ask 70 people what they're interested in, what they're excited about, who's the most interesting founder they've met or backed. And so that's how I think about community development. I think for those people who want to scale that, you go from being a community to being sort of a network. You go from being a network to maybe being like a lot of people. I don't know what the term would be. Like a lot of common people, right? A conference would be that, right? You go to a big conference, 10,000 people. You certainly don't know all 10,000. You can't deliver the same value to all 10,000 people, and that's okay. Like you're not supposed to, but you can certainly deliver the same kind of value to 100 people. You can know that
mhm,
those 100 people, what they need the most to deliver value.
mm. How do you interact with, you mentioned 12 partners at your new fund. How do you first meet them and like making sure for example, let's say if you are saying, let's say a executive or like the founder of Casper or whatever, they're also probably really busy people. I'm sure,
Yeah.
you're awesome, they're awesome, blah, blah, blah. But they probably have like a 75 priority. They're making angel investment too, like all that stuff. So how do you kind of like maintain the relationship, like who are also like very busy people and then, with their own motivations.
Yeah. Yeah. So being a partner in a Next Wave fund comes with not just a checkbook, but we think about it as a master class in venture investing. So as I said, like my partner Jeff not only teaches the launching tech ventures class, but he also teaches the class at HBS on being a venture capitalist. So it's helpful. He's got a lot of content. And so we offer a lot of education. So there's a value in addition to the check writing. For the
Mm,
people who are already active angels, often this is leverage on their angel check. Like they were going to write a $5,000 check or a $10,000 check, and now they can write, $55,000 or $60,000, right? So that's helpful to them, and they get upside from that, of course.
mhm,
And then I would just say the third thing goes back to what I was saying before about providing value to a tighter knit community. I know what each one of our partners is
Mhm.
working on right now in their day to day, right? In their day job, I should say. So a founder told me, one of the partners told me that they just had to make, some difficult decisions in their company. I know he's dealing with that, and I can offer up like, hey, I've been through those same things both as an entrepreneur and operator. I've also coached. I've backed 65 companies now. I've coached almost every one of those founders on making those same difficult decisions. And so, it is about knowing what your community needs, and that is where people choose to spend their time. So I go back to that same big, very simple thing, like quality over quantity. um, I have an 8-year-old and an 8-month-old at home. And my 8-year-old, now talks about the golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated. Ultimately, that's what I try to do with every partner. Like, I would love for them to offer help to me if I needed it, and therefore I offer help to them. And so
Mhm.
investing is almost a byproduct. Each one of them is doing the same thing with their own community of people,
Mhm.
right? This founder knows hundreds of other founders. They're offering them help and guidance, and that's an extension of the work we can do at Next Wave, and that's an extension of the work that we can do at Flybridge then.
Mhm. If you live in Silicon Valley, how would you create like an engaging community? And then would you create it based on AI?
Oh
Or
my goodness.
what's
Uh,
like what would be your thing?
that is a great question. I've never lived in Silicon Valley, so I will preface it with that. So I don't want anybody who watches this to be like, this jerk from New York is telling us how to do stuff out here. So it's not that. I look, AI is certainly the hottest area right now. All the dollars going there. Everyone knows this. I certainly wouldn't go so broad. I think at the end of the day, for me, the community starts from people that I'm already invested in. And I don't mean that with dollars. I mean my time, my energy, my
Mhm.
thought. And so if I'm sitting in your camp, it's like this intersection of emerging managers wanting to learn about venture. Maybe AI is a main flavor to it. Perhaps it's people who, it could be people who are immigrants. It could be people, we've got a good friend who's doing that in New York right now. What is that lens that you can take on a smaller tight knit group where there's much more commonality across the founding members, and it really only starts with 10 or 20. Like, it doesn't need to be more than that, right? It could be 10 or 20 people that have a common challenging goal. And so I'd get more focused rather than less. um
Mhm.
at the part of, I think, what you'd ultimately want to do is figure out your why. Why build this community? Is it about deal flow? Is it about deal sourcing? Like, you want to be a venture investor and you want to write angel checks? Then sure, you probably are thinking about what are the problems that your network has of the people who also see great deals, right? And there's sort of this, like, you think about these like concentric circles or whatever. Like that is a different thing than if you were trying to help entrepreneurs build better companies, right? You then probably surround yourself with engineers and product people. They don't necessarily have to have great deal flow. So if I'm thinking about that for you and for the Valley, it's how do you get really specific to start and then grow from there. I think most people, by the way, would say like one of YC's biggest mistakes, and I think YC is making this change, is that they went so broad and so big after years, right? That is, they've gone to so many companies per class. It's hard to have the same quality as when you really just focus on the 20 or 30. You can know every single one. You know what their problems are. And by the way, they share the same problems.
I think I have two thoughts on that. Like I feel like I'm a multi-question asker. People hate that. Yeah, my guests have mentioned to me like I need to stop asking them 10 questions at a time.
I like it. I've been taking notes, by the way, so it's all good. As you ask
Thank you.
questions, I have follow-ups for you later. So
Okay, I'm sorry. I also like wrote
no.
down I typed down questions on my notes. So I wonder, okay, so here are a couple things. One is like when you're starting a fund, right? Like so you join a fund, but like I'm sure you have like a lot more experience than a lot of the listeners. I heard the advice of like when you're starting a fund, you need to vet your idea with the institutional LPs versus like just go after um, family offices or individual check writers because I heard that like you need to shoot for like people who would invest in your first three funds because one fund is super likely to have a non great outcome. So I've like I mean these are just like rumors or like whatever like things people say, right? So and like when you ask me like, what does emerging management want or like what does people want, I feel like fundraising is something that literally everybody do all the time. I've heard so many
Yeah.
things about like I think like, bring in, let's say, LPs or something, maybe it's like a better way to group them together. However, that becomes transactional when everyone's
Yeah.
going after this person right after they contribute like an hour of their time, right? So how would you kind of like make it incentivize like to for people to come? The second
Yeah.
question is like the 10-20 people thing. So like I know that we chat about don't scale, but like if it's like 10-20 people, like what's a frequency you would use to like actually be BFF with
Bringing
them or
them
like to go
together.
to yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'll come to that one because I have a very strong opinion about frequency and frequency bias, or recency bias, I should say. But on the first one and starting a fund, like, so it's actually funny you said that people told you to vet your fund idea with like institutions. I think it's an interesting point. If you are starting your first fund, you are likely not raising a fund big enough that any major institution is going to write a check. They have their own challenges, just like you'll have your fund portfolio construction. You don't want to own too much of any one company. You don't want
Oh,
to write too
oh,
big of a
also,
check.
I want to, for legal reason, I want to say this part is for educational and entertainment purposes
No,
only. This is literally just our own opinion. We're not trying to do anything here. Anyway, yada yada
yeah. So
Sorry.
not, this is not about fundraising right now. That's fair. That's a good point.
It's just
Um,
like, yeah, for
Yes, no,
like,
smart.
please.
No, and so I would just say like, so this is all theoretical, but it's, for me at least, this works. Like, I wouldn't be thinking about institutions as LPs until at least fund two. Most are not going to be able to commit. Like, there are a handful that are emerging fund manager institutions that are worth targeting and talking to. I definitely agree that your goal is to get LPs who would back your first two or three funds, but even individuals can do that. Like, frankly, we would talk to individuals and say, what would you like to commit? And they'd be like, oh, I'll do $1 million. You say, great, why don't you do 500K? And then earmark 500 for my next fund, because I want to make sure you can be here for fund one and fund two, right? Like, that's how I would approach it. The idea of vetting it with institutional LPs is really smart. I think there is a point, but it's truly, there's this line like they talk about, if you want capital, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for capital. I would truly go in asking for advice. I'd truly go to institutions and say, listen, I really know that you would not invest in me today. I'm raising a small fund, whatever it is. What I really want to know is, if I was successful here, what would you want to see in year 3 or year 4 or year 5? What would get you there? So I can start to think about that and build to that. So that would be my take on that one. The idea of approaching institutions, like, yeah, I mean, they get pitched all the time. They go to these conferences, they get together. It's just like it is my job to vet founders, and I get 1,200 plus pitch decks a year that I look at. I meet with 700 founders. I have second meetings with like 400 of those second meetings or beyond. 100 of those come into my team meetings with the rest of my partnership. Like, that's also an LP's job. And so I think you just certainly don't call it spray and pray, but I think that you do go broad. I think you try to talk to as many as you can. And you just go in with the mindset that, again, it goes back to this early question you asked. Like, confidence is like, you're unique. Like, your take on the world is unique. Your deal flow is unique because of these things that you've developed, and you've developed it over time, right? You've built this brand here with Venture with Grace. And so I'm sure people reach out to you all the time with ideas. They want to talk to you about their startup, right? Like, and you're just like, yeah, okay, this is a unique asset that I have. You may or may not believe this is the one that's going to win. That's up to you as an LP. But certainly no one else has Venture with Grace, right? It's like, not like, obviously. So it is unique. And so then it's just about telling the story. And so I would just say, like, I wouldn't shy away from talking to those groups that are already seeing hundreds of others. Like, we're all talking to them, where when we go out to fundraise, we talk to those people too. I've been doing this a long time now. I've done 4 funds with my partners. My partners have done 3 funds before that without me. So we have a long history. This is pre-Flybridge. but still we're having all those same first meetings, right? We go to the same institutions. We're like, hey, we didn't talk to you before, or we did 3 years ago. Our pitch is different now. And you hope, again, it goes back to there's some luck and timing that goes into it. And there's a lot of, what is your story? How is it unique and differentiated? So hopefully that covered what you were asking on the question of the community and frequency. Look, people are busy. You said this before. I believe that most success in venture, in seeing deals, comes from like recency bias, especially the seed or pre-seed. You think about the investors that you saw or spoke to most recently before anything else. Every founder will say, I'm looking for help. I'm looking for smart investors. I'm looking for, but when you look at their list and you're like, how did you make up this list? And they really give you the truth. They're like, oh, these are the people I thought of, right? Why'd you think of them? Most of them, it's because of recency bias. So I don't know that there's a one size fits all. If you had a 20 or 30 or 40 person community, like how frequent's too frequent. I can tell you that I used to get together my WeWork labs community managers, anywhere from monthly to even weekly. Now we were all in the same city in the early days, so it was easier. Everybody was pretty young. Most of them were, without kids yet. And so they could go out late. They could, they didn't have as many responsibilities. So maybe that would change today if I were doing the exact same thing. But I don't think that monthly is a bad thing. And you have to expect, just like every other event, that only 30, 40, 50, 60% are going to attend every time. And so I would also think about that. Like, if you had 20 people in the community, a dozen coming together is a good group. And so if you did that monthly, you probably touch everybody every 2 months. And that doesn't seem like crazy frequent. So for our next wave team, just to put it in perspective, we're trying to do something monthly. And then we have an asynchronous, Slack check-in weekly, which is just, what are you working on? What are you excited about? What's happening in your portfolio, whatever. And, that works well. Like it's enough to keep you top of mind.
I think those are some really great lessons and then like very hands-on. So like I guess like there's a couple questions there. I don't want to like, okay, overwhelm you, but okay, one
Yeah.
is like I think number one is like when you're joining like Flybridge, like your partners have very different skill set and background than you.
Yeah.
I feel like one thing is like it's really hard to, I mean, if I were joining a fund, I would figure out like who has my strength and then I want to join that fund so I can directly learn from that guy or girl to like just see how they're like leveraging this, right? Like, so how, and then even like for the people with different background to recognize your strengths and then like being able to know this is gonna turn into something big. It's like
Yeah.
it's a challenge. So like I wonder what's your approach when you were like deciding to join this group?
It's
Yeah.
really funny you say about your strengths with not. So I almost took the opposite approach. So I wanted people, first and foremost, I wanted people that I felt like I would enjoy spending time with, right? Because this is, again, it goes back to the people point. We have a 4.5 hour Zoom or in-person meeting every Monday. We have another hour and a half on Thursdays. We often have, I have 5 calls today with my partner, Jeff, with various LPs and portfolio company founders. We spend a lot of time together. So first and foremost was, do we like each other? Do we annoy each other? But funny enough, you say about this, like finding commonality. I was actually looking for people that filled the gaps for all the things I wasn't. So like I dropped out of school to start working in tech. My partners are all HBS grads. Like, so I was looking at, they went through way more school than I did. They're Boston and I'm New York. Like I didn't necessarily at that time think to myself, I want to do more of what I do now. I thought about, I'm pretty good at what I do. Look, I have imposter syndrome about a lot of things, but I'm pretty good at being in New York, meeting great founders, supporting them, convincing them that I'm a great investor, and then actually proving it by doing the work over the next decade. I'm pretty sure I'm good at those things. And so for me, I was looking for people who could teach me how to be a great board member, because I hadn't been that before, who could teach me how to run a fund, who could teach me how to manage LPs, who could teach me how to fundraise. Those are all things that I had no knowledge of. And so I kind of went seeking out that to balance me out. And it's worked really well. Like your mileage may vary, but like for me, that's worked really well. I will certainly, like, I have 3 other team members that I've now hired in New York. They're all awesome. and they have their own strengths. Some of them things that I don't do well, and some things that I do okay. And so we constantly try to sort of add to that. But I think it's a really good question. Like for me, it really starts with the humans though. Like, do you get along, and do you have core values that overlap? And you're not going to get them all right. This is not about finding your doppelganger, right? This is about finding like people that you enjoy, right? And this is no different if you started a company, no different in finding a spouse or a significant other.
How do you quickly vet that? And then I guess, like, how do you meet them? And what were like, I know that you were chatting with one of the founding,
Yeah.
founding member for a while too about starting your fund. Like, what do they
Yeah.
see in you to mess?
Timing. Yeah. Timing is everything in that case. I met them because I was talking to David about me wanting to start my own fund. It was good timing for them. They had been talking about having a new partner in New York that led New York. It's just really good overlap in timing. I don't know. Again, it goes back to the recency bias. I don't know that I would have been on their list, like to talk to about that role, and they wouldn't have been on mine, to be frank, had I not been in that moment. So I would say that is certainly the case. It wasn't quick. There's one unique thing about venture capital as a business that's different from almost any other industry, which is when you form a fund, the fund has an end date. It has a maturity date. And so what you are signing up for is to work on this one company, this vehicle, for 10 to 12 years with these people. And even if you decide in year 5, like, I don't want to be a venture investor anymore, I'm going to start a company, I'm going to leave, you still have a portfolio of companies that you have to work with and a team you have to work with for the next 7, 8, 9 years. Like, that is true. As an entrepreneur in almost any other business, you don't have an end date. You start, and frankly, you hope you're wildly successful in 2 years so that you can be rich and buy an island and go retire, right? It might take you 20 years. We don't know. So for me, it took me about 4 months of vetting. Probably I went to Boston half a dozen times to spend days with them. They came to New York a half a dozen times to spend days with me. We looked at deals together. I went to board meetings with a couple of them to shadow them in boards. I talked to a dozen founders that have been backed by them. It's a lot of diligence, way more, frankly, diligence than we do when we write a seed check. Again, it's like most of our seed bets won't succeed. So that's okay. But I don't have to work with those founders for 10 to 12 years. A lot of them won't make it, right? For the ones who make it, I need to keep working with them. But the point being, it's just a different level of vetting. And so it's not a quick thing. I wouldn't rush it. If anybody is listening and they're talking about joining a fund, spend an extra week, spend an extra month if you can afford it. Take the time. You don't want to wind up in a bad partnership.
Wow. I want to switch gear a little bit, saying something lighter. So okay, so we've chat about events, right? So let's say dinners or something. How do you make a successful dinner? And that's both from a social capital perspective, also a financial perspective. I don't want to lose money over these dinners, right? So some people are sponsor or whatever, but sponsor also wants let's say email lists or whatever. How do you balance out this is not an overwhelming experience for yourself as well as the participants in the group?
Yeah. I guess I would just say this goes back to having a tight knit community. I think you just sort of lay some ground rules and be upfront about it. So, we hosted 2 things last week with our extended kind of community of Flybridge founders and the next wave partners. And we did have sponsors for it, but we were upfront with the sponsors that we weren't going to share the email list, but we were happy to send a note on their behalf and make the connection. And so I think at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be complicated. When we think about it, we are in the business of building really long-term relationships. Those relationships, aren't always simple. Sometimes you have to pass on great entrepreneurs that you want to still be friends with, and you hope that'll still be the case. Sometimes you tell a sponsor they can't have a partner, they can't have something that they ask for, and you hope they still want to come back and work with you again. I think we just try to be really upfront. We have not that this is necessarily for partners, but we have a page on our site which outlines our exact steps that we take in making an investment decision. And it's this is where you start, this is where you end, this is who you meet with, this is who makes final decisions. I think you do the same thing with your community. You just say to them like, hey, we're going to host these things. We are going to have sponsors. Here's the relationship we're going to have with the sponsors. This is how we're going to treat them. By the way, this is how we want the community to treat those sponsors. Like when they're there, like don't treat them like they're pariahs, they're service providers or whatever. Like, and so I think that to me, it's just like being upfront and honest.
Okay, so I want to be mindful of the time. I have 1 minute fire round
Oh
for
yeah.
you.
All right.
Okay,
I'll try to be super succinct.
What's your favorite book?
My favorite book, Leadership and Self-Deception.
Oh, wow. That's a unique book. Leadership and
Deception.
I'm going to check it out.
I read it like once every 24 months.
Oh, wow. That's frequent-ish.
Yeah.
So who will you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to my dinner party? Oh my goodness. I would say, how many people do I get to invite?
It's your party.
It's my party. All right. No, so I just want like one-on-one. I want to hang out with Barack Obama. I think, I grew up in an era where, I was young enough that was one of the sort of first presidents that I really sort of knew anything about. I mean, I knew about Bill Clinton, but I was like pretty young then, but I was old enough to care, I was old enough to vote. So he's certainly high on my list. I would also say that for me, I think that Elon Musk is somebody who I'm fascinated by. He may not be the most popular guy, but I just think there are a few people in the world, in the history of the world, that have a potential changing the world in as big a way that he does. So I would keep it tight. I'd keep it intimate. And I think the two of them in a room together would be fascinating. More than fascinating.
Sure. Please invite me if that happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, who made the biggest impact in your career?
Oh, biggest impact on my career. So I would call out, I'm going to call out two people. I'm trying to keep it short, but the first one is this guy, Bryce Saleh, who was the CIO of the first company I worked for when I was 19 years old, when I dropped out of college to start working in tech. And he encouraged me to just follow my interest in tech as opposed to necessarily staying in school. He's like, if you love doing this, you know how to do it, why don't you just start working on it? And he renewed my passport and let me travel around the world for work to China and Mexico and Western Europe. And it opened my eyes to what a big city was. I grew up in a tiny little farm town in the middle of nowhere. So like, I didn't know what a big city was until I landed in like Hong Kong. The second person I have to say would be Adam Newman at this point. Like WeWork is a monumental shift in the world. And like, as much as Adam, did the things he did at WeWork, and we're still friendly, but we don't work together, but like, without WeWork as a platform and changing New York's landscape and all that, I don't think I'd be doing this for the rest of my career. So,
where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work, you find me with my 8-year-old and 8-month-old wandering around Madison Square Park, or Madison Square Park adjacent. We love raising kids in the city, so we spend a lot of time in the city on the weekends. And so when I'm not here spending time with my kids, they're both fun in their own ways. It's a lot to hit restart after my son's 8 years old. So starting from the beginning with a child who's just learning how to sleep through the night. So you find me there a lot by our bedside.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jesse, for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. One of the live sessions.